So, welcome to this special video with Andy Sexton.
Hi.
Good evening.
We always do this awkward wave.
Everybody waves on Zoom with no idea why.
It's really hard to know what to do, isn't it? You know? So Andy is a bike builder, and oh my words. Andy,
Fitter primarily.
Fitter. There it is. Bike fitter. That's it. That's awkward. Awesome. Bike builder, bike fitter. Andy, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yes, I've been in the bike trade for around 15 years now. I started life as an engineer. I was an engineer for 10 or 11 years before I got into the bike trade. First entry into the bike trade was direct sales. Worked for Planet X Bikes, mainly doing their triathlon sales and advising people kind of what sort of bikes to buy. Then just over 10 years ago, started my own business, Bike Science. Had a few places in Bristol, in central Bristol, and now I actually work from home full time. So the studio I'll take you around in a moment is actually in my house. I primarily focus on bike fitting, and then I build bespoke bikes for people. I can do off the peg frames with bespoke bits on, all the way up to kind of stuff that's been completely made to measure for people. But my primary job, the bulk of my hours when we're not in lockdown like we are at the minute, is bike fittings, which I tend to do sort of between sort of 10 and 20 bike fits a week, and I have been doing for the last 10 years. So it's kind of it's what I spend. Well, it's a full time. A lot of people don't believe you can do it as a full time job, but it is effectively how I make my living. So.
It takes a
long
time.
Yeah, it's not just a 2-minute job.
One is a long time.
Yeah, so appointments go from the shortest appointment is really just somebody coming along to try and determine what type of bike they're going to buy, or even a pair of shoes I do an appointment for, even a pair of shorts I do an appointment for, believe it or not.
Are you really sure?
To the longest appointment will last over 2 days. It'll reach over 2 days, and we'll go on to talk about this a little more in a bit about bike fit. But that would include most bike fits would include some kind of review after a period of time as well. So we don't want to look at bike fit as being a one shot. You've come for a visit and it's done. Bike fitting is often about process. It's often about a gradual improvement in position rather than just kind of like, there you go, off you go and ride in that position for the rest of your life. It's something that you should see as developing over time. But yeah, my longest fit is 2 days. So 1 day indoors and then a second day outdoors. It's where we go and do aerodynamic testing out on the road. So.
Jeez.
Wow.
That's mental.
So I guess that's what it leads for. Fine, you lead.
So first question.
Let's do it.
Okay, so the first question we got was, can you explain an easy way for beginners to understand how their gearing works? And then off the back of that, any advice or tips on getting the most out of your gears?
Yeah, the thing with gearing is most people drive a car and they understand perfectly well in a car how the gears work, and then you put them on a bicycle and all of a sudden, because they can see the gears, they can see the cogs and they can see the chain, all of a sudden it goes out the window and they can't understand it. Effectively, if you drive your car, you put it in first gear and pull away, it's very good in that gear for pulling away, for getting up to speed, but then eventually the engine will be revving so fast, and you want to think the revving of the engine to be the same thing as you pedaling. So if you're pedaling away at such an uncontrollable speed that you start to bounce in the saddle and you start to lose your coordination, then at that point you're very, very inefficient. So everybody's got kind of an optimum rev range or a cadence in the case of the cyclist that they're going to be comfortable in. And for most people, it's a range. It's not a specific number, but for most people, we'll find a number that they're pretty happy at. And the idea of the gears is to allow you to sit at that cadence for the majority of the time. So this is where I'm going to share my screen. So again, hopefully this will work.
Some fancy stuff going on now.
So hopefully you can still hear me, and hopefully you can now see what I'm doing. So all I'm going to do is kind of sketch the gears on the bike. So typically you've got 2 chain rings at the front, and you've got a number of cogs at the back. And I won't do the full cassette, but we'll do kind of a varying size cassette. So you can be in either one of these 2 rings at the front. This is a big one. This is the small one. Now, as a general rule, when you're going up a hill, you're going to need the lower range of gears. So using this one at the front, the small one at the front, is going to give you your easier gears. When you're going fast or down a hill, this is the one that's going to give you the harder gears to push. The harder a gear is, for each revolution, each time you turn the pedals once, the further along the road you go. So the biggest gear on your bike is the big chain ring and the small cog at the back. So that'll be this chain line. So you'll only really use that gear some of the time. A lot of people think, well, I want to go fast, so I've got to put it in a big gear. You should always be in the gear that's appropriate. So most people will ride when they're racing on a flat course, it'll be in the big chainring and somewhere in the middle of the cassette at the back. There are gears to avoid. So a lot of people will kind of break or wear out their bike by using, if I just delete that a second, by using what we call crossover gears. So they'll be in the big ring at the front and they'll find themselves in the big cog at the back. That puts, as you can see, that puts a lot of, you imagine there's a bicycle chain connecting those two cogs. That puts a lot of strain on the chain. So the chain's basically working at an angle the whole time. It increases the risk of breaking the chain. It decreases the drivetrain efficiency. So basically you don't go as far for the same amount of effort. And it also wears stuff out quicker as well. So we try and avoid that gear. So if you needed a gear that low, you'd be better off putting it in the small chainring and then maybe using one of these cogs. So you get a straighter chain line and you'll get the equivalent gear, despite the fact that you've got 11 cogs on the back and 2 at the front. You don't actually have 22 distinct gears. You've probably got something like 12 or 13 distinct gears, and everything else you can replicate one gear by being on the other chainring. So effectively, when you're climbing up hills, you're using these kinds of gears. So they're low ratio gears. You have to pedal a lot of times to move a small distance along the road. And when you're going faster, you'll be in your bigger gears. So you've been something like this or this one, where you don't have to pedal quite so many times to go the same distance, to go a bigger distance along the road. So if you're going at high speed, you're maintaining that efficient cadence, but pedaling in a gear that allows you to travel at speed while maintaining that cadence. And that's effectively it. And if you think it's any more complicated than that, you're overthinking it. I think it's really probably the answer.
Yeah, but it's a really good illustration, because certainly for beginners, what we tend to find when we're coaching people is that they will literally start right small on the front, work all the way up to the 11, and when I get to that, well, now I'll go back down and I'll get onto the big one. And
what's quite cool to watch is if you the electronic systems, Shimano Di2, it's got an automatic system now where you can basically program it. You tell it what gear ratios you've got, and then you can program it. So if I press any button on the right hand side, it's going to put me in the next available hardest gear, and if I push any button on the left hand side, it's going to put me in the next available easiest gear. And you can watch it. It'll basically flip up the cogs on the back until, if you're going easier, it'll go up and up and up on the back until it knows that the next easiest available gear is on the other chain set, and then on the other chain ring, and then it will flip from big ring to little ring for you. And at that point, it flips the chain ring and then shifts a couple of cogs on the back. So if you really want to make it easy for yourself, then that's the best way of doing it. But even if you just watch your system like that working, you can work out where the next available easiest gear is. But effectively, all you're trying to do is for it to fit. You're trying to use your gears to make yourself feel as comfortable as possible on the bike. If you push too heavy a gear, you'll find it becomes, you have to produce a huge amount of force. You have to pedal hard. If you produce too easy a gear, your legs are spinning away like fury, and you can't keep up with anyone. So.
Yeah, well, the interesting thing for us is that we're about to learn how to ride tandem. Lauren is all about power, and I'm definitely more about that. And we've got to try and meet equal somewhere, me. So maybe the Di2 is the way.
Well, even with Di2, that tells you what the next available gear is, but it doesn't. It won't mismatch a high cadence rider with a low cadence rider. That's just something you're just going to have to learn to.
Absolutely. We'll compromise and meet in the middle. That's cool. No, that's good. So next question is, how important is a proper bike fit, and what are the key benefits of getting one done?
I think bike fit is one of those things that a lot of people don't really understand fully. What, for me, the term bike fit covers a large range of subjects. A lot of people think, bike fit, that's just putting the saddle up to the right height and moving it backwards and forwards and moving the bars up and down, putting a different leg stem on or something like that. For me, bike fit starts with choosing the right bike in the first place. So having a bike that's not only suitable for your body shape and your posture and how stiff you are and how old you are and how far you want to ride and how fast you want to ride. but also choosing the right kind of bike. So some people will come and buy a fantastically skinny tired 25mm tire race bike and then decide, well, actually I want to go and ride on towpaths on it. So it's the bike fitter's job, or the bike salesperson's job, where this is where sales and fit kind of cross over between each other. It's their job to ask you questions to determine exactly what sort of bike is going to work for you. A lot of people might come in to buy a bike with a real strong impression of, oh, well, my mate said one of these was good, so I've got to buy one of those, or I've got to buy a such and such, like a Canyon is a typical one because it's cheap and it's good value for money. So a lot of people will kind of come in with a predetermined idea of what they want, and then find it quite difficult to take advice as to what would actually do the job better for them. So for me, I'm always asking questions. Then the three primary questions that we need to ask when somebody's buying a bike are, what do you want to do on it? And I mean exactly what do you want to do on it. You want to put a rack on it, some tri-bars on it? Are you going to do an Ironman or just sprint distance? Do you want to commute on it and all those kinds of things? How much do you want to spend on it? And then what fits you the best? And once you can answer those three questions, you're effectively pretty much made the decision for you. If you came in with a short list of 50 bikes and answered those three questions accurately, that's easily got you down to a choice of 3 or 4 now. Now all you've got to do is pick the one that you can afford, or the one that you like the colour of best. From a fit point of view, so you have to start at the beginning, which is buying the right bike in the first place. So a bike fitter's job is to advise you which bikes he knows or she knows that they're confident that they can get a good position on when you later bring the bike in for bike fit. Things like shoes, the amount of people that buy again, they're kind of like these fancy looking Italian shoes that kind of looks like a sexy cycling shoe with no prior knowledge at all of what might fit them. So cycling shoes come in different widths as well as volume, so the height of the shoe, as well as different stiffnesses, different closures, all those kinds of things. So kind of, I do 2 shoe brands. I sell Physic and I sell Lake, and the shape of the shoes couldn't be more different to each other. One fits a very long, slender foot, and one will fit a high volume, wide foot. So a bike fitter's job is to have the knowledge to be able to understand that kind of thing as well. A lot of people will come in with bikes that a shop has fitted them, in inverted commas, and they've effectively just put a short stem on and put the bars as high as they'll go. Now, to me, that's not a fit. That's just kind of like, well, let's kind of make the customer feel as though they've had a fit. But all we've effectively done is done the easiest thing in the world, which is just put a short stem on it. What you're really looking at from a bike fitter's point of view is a number of different things. Everybody is asymmetric. I've got some motion capture stuff here. I'll just kind of show you around my fit studio while I'm here. But we've got a thing here which is a motion capture system. I can cover you in infrared LEDs and measure various joint angles and things like that as you ride. And then the other system we've got running is, let me show you that. Probably on the TV, so this is just kind of my bike on the fitting jig as well. And the other systems we've got are things like a saddle pressure system. So this thing that I've got on the bike at the minute transmits. It's got a mat which records pressure and profile of pressure across the seat as I ride. And hopefully the TV's got that running. It's going to run. Yeah, so now you can see an animation of what the saddle pressure looks like as a rider pedals. And what you probably can't quite see on that is there's a little tiny red dot in the centre of it that's moving around, and that shows the centre of pressure. And the amount that moves forwards and backwards and side to side can effectively tell me how stable the rider is on their saddle. Flip you back around again. So we're kind of looking at all sorts of things to do with stability and the amount you move on the bike. And generally, the more a person moves and shuffles and fidgets on the bike, the less comfortable it is. What they're effectively looking for is they're constantly searching for that comfortable spot. Yeah. So from a fit point of view, but the other thing we can look at from that instability point of view, you imagine the rider's pelvis is kind of doing that on the bike and this on the bike all the time. Everybody's got an asymmetry, whether that be a flexibility asymmetry or a leg length difference, or those are the typical ones, or they've just physically set the bike up asymmetrical. They've got one cleat in a different position to the other one. Because we're trying to make an asymmetric person fit to a symmetrical piece of equipment, we have to be able to make changes to the equipment to allow for the fact that somebody's got an asymmetry and be as sympathetic towards that asymmetry as possible, and even in some cases try and do things to correct it. So in an extreme case, I've got a customer who's got one leg that's 2 centimeters shorter than the other. So this is not a minor difference in leg length. This is a big, significant difference in leg length. We've got a shorter crank on one side of the bike than the other. Quite a lot of cases, we'll be doing things like putting small shims between the cleat and the shoe to just lengthen the leg of one side slightly, but without an objective measure of what happens when I put a shim in a shoe. You're basically just guessing. So it's the important thing is to try and spot asymmetries, try and spot what the rider does to compensate for the fact that they're asymmetrical. Like I, for instance, have got my sacroiliac joint on one side gets a little stiff. So when my right leg comes to the top of the pedal stroke, my pelvis does that literally every single time I pedal. And you imagine I'm doing that 60,000 times every 100 miles. It can get quite uncomfortable. Yeah. So what you're really trying to do is minimize that. Now, sometimes that's physical work off the bike. So in my case, I have to do a lot of joint mobility work to try and make sure my sacroiliac joint stays nice and mobile. And in some cases, it is a physical thing. So like I've been with the saddle pressure system, we can search for saddles that help the rider support their weight better and help them encourage them to sit more symmetrically. So from a fit point of view, what we're trying to do is find and identify asymmetries, identify the compensation patterns for asymmetries, and then do something about them. But then also, from a general fit point of view, put the contact points of the bike, the saddle, the bars, and the pedals in a position that encourages the rider to sit with good posture. So if you imagine, if you're doing an Ironman, say, so you're likely to be on the bike somewhere between 4.5 and 7 or 8 hours in an Ironman. If you've got bad posture, effectively, so that the spine and the pelvis aren't nicely aligned with each other, like they would be in a kind of a Pilates type movement, that's going to hurt. And if I asked you to sit in a chair with bad posture for 6 or 7 hours, that would still hurt. So try and imagine doing that on a bike and producing enough power to pedal you along the road as well at the same time. It can get very, very uncomfortable. So yeah, what we're effectively doing is trying to put the contact points in a position which will encourage the rider to relax and sit in a good posture, and then helping them learn what that good posture is. It isn't just about kind of, there's the fit, you've got to go and ride like that. It's kind of, well, there's the fit, I'd encourage you to try and ride like that, but in order to do it, you're going to have to start learning to relax your shoulders or tighten your, engage your core when you're riding, and actually physically sit still. You have to think about sitting still. So there's an awful lot of things going in combination with each other. There's the positioning of the contact points. There's identifying the right contact points to use, like the correct saddle for somebody or the correct pedals or whatever. Quite often the correct handlebars in triathlon. But then there's also the educational side of that, as in, if you do this with your body, you'll find it more comfortable. You'll find it easier to relax. And then there's the performance aspect of it. When we do things like one of the systems I've got, we can look at aerodynamics of a rider. So we look at frontal area, so the amount of area that the rider is projecting to the wind effectively. The smaller you can make that, the faster you're going to go. And for a lot of people, the sheer educational side of, I've seen how much power I can save by putting my head in a slightly different position, is a very powerful learning tool. Yeah. Somebody might say, well, I'm going to spend £1,000 on a pair of wheels, but you could get the same gain by simply putting your head in, holding your head in a slightly different way on the bike. And having a tool to be able to show people that is quite important, and very powerful as an educational tool. But yeah, from a how important is bike fit, like for me, a lot of people will spend more time and effort having a pair of trousers fitted when they go to a clothes shop than they will having a bike fitted. But they'll spend £5,000 on a bike. A bike is a big investment, and to expect it to be anything other than perfect, or as close to perfect as physically possible, is it's a bit short-sighted, really. So yeah, certainly if you're going to invest even a cheap bike, even if you bought a £500, £400 bike off eBay, it's still even £400 is a significant lump of money to spend on something without it being right. And particularly if you're going on and spending £3,000, £4,000, £5,000, even £10,000 on some of these kind of super duper tri bikes, it needs to be right.
Definitely. Yeah, I wish I could spend £10,000. But yeah,
it's the only point you get into the bike trade is so you get cheap bikes.
But do you? I mean, a lot of people. So when you ask people, have you had your bike fitted? Oh no, I'm just getting started. I'm not really that serious. But actually, it's almost more important for you to be considering that from right from the go.
Yeah, it's learning good habits. If you watch pro riders, and I think Bradley Wiggins for me is one of the classic cases of that. He learned to ride from an early age. You see his posture on the bike. He just looks like he was born to be on a bike. Yeah. Beautiful shape back, lovely and relaxed. And if you learn from the start bad habits, then all you're going to do is learn. It's a bit like it's effectively the same as swimming. If an adult tries to teach themselves to swim, invariably they teach themselves to swim badly. Yeah. And it's pretty much the same on a bike. We're not designed to sit on bikes. About the only thing in triathlon we're designed to do is run. We're not designed to sit on bikes. So learning to sit on a bike properly, and in a way that is not going to hurt you, and obviously make you quicker and more efficient. Well, I think one thing that surprises novice riders, even if they've been good at other sports, I had a chap in for a fit not so long ago that was a very, very good 800 meter runner, as in kind of sub 1:45 minute 800 meter runner, like an international class 800 meter runner. And he couldn't understand how he could absolutely annihilate his friends when he went out for a run. But when he went out on the bike with them, he couldn't even keep up. Now, clearly that's not a VO2 max thing. That's not to do with how fit he is. He just hasn't got the technique and the body positioning to be able to sit on a bike properly. And why should he? Like, if you're trying to learn to ride a bike when you're in your 40s or older, why would you know how to sit on a bike? So there has to be an element of learning how to do that, and obviously having somebody to guide you in that learning process is quite important.
Definitely.
100%.
Definitely. There you go. It's very important.
I suppose it kind of leads on quite nicely to the next question. So what are the best ways to gauge if your posture or position on the bike is good?
I wish I knew. It's being observant. The easiest people to bike fit generally are pros. And I'm lucky enough to have fitted quite a few pro riders over the years, and they're very, very good at giving feedback. You make a tiny little change, and they're so used to riding their bike. Imagine if you ride your bike for 30 or 40 hours a week, every single week for the last 10 years, you get really highly attuned to how it feels, just what a pedal stroke feels like. And so it's kind of making tiny little changes, and they'll tell you immediately whether they like it or not. Fitting somebody who's a novice is a lot more difficult because they're generally not so good at giving feedback. But effectively, if it hurts, it's wrong. A lot of people kind of think, oh well, yeah, it's a riding a bike. It looks uncomfortable. You used to seeing images of people in the Tour de France and whatever riding up a hill with pain faces. Well, they've got pain faces because they're riding at 450 watts and for hours or days on end. Just the process of sitting on a bike and pottering down the road on it at a gentle pace should not be uncomfortable. And it shouldn't be scary. It shouldn't feel imbalanced. It should feel like the bike's in control. You should be able to relax on it. If a rider's intention, if their muscles or their neck or their shoulders, we see people coming in for bike fits who are absolutely. You put them on the bike for the first 30 seconds on the turbo, and their shoulders are like wood. They're rigid, and you'll read through the questionnaire of the issues they're having before they go in for the fit, and they'll say, "Well, I get neck pain." It's like, when I'm allowed to swear, like no shit, you get neck pain. Like if I ask you to stand with your neck rigid for 4 or 5 hours, you get neck pain regardless of whether you're on the bike. So it's trying to find a way of getting people to be able to relax on the bike, and if their position isn't allowing them to relax, then they're going to get in pain straight away. People also expect saddles to be uncomfortable. A good saddle that fits you properly and is the appropriate shape for your riding posture shouldn't be radically uncomfortable. Yeah, you'll get a bit of heat build up over 4, 5 or 6 hours. You might get a little bit of pressure build up over that length of time, but it shouldn't be kind of like, I'm on it for 20 minutes and I want to get off, or I'm going numb, or it hurts to go to the toilet when I get off, or anything along those lines. It shouldn't be painful. And just sitting on the bike in general should not be a painful process. So I think that's the first thing. The other thing, again, like that guy who was the 800 meter runner, if you feel like you're having to put an awful lot of effort in and not keep up with people who look like they're relaxed and finding it easy, then that there's a good chance that that's a fit issue as well. especially if you know that physically you should be as fit as them.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's really kind of, do you feel safe and relaxed on your bike, and are you keeping up with people that really you should be keeping up with?
Yeah, that's good. And going back to your first point, do you think that's where a lot of people get, not wrong with bike fit, but this whole thing of actually a bike fitter, I know that should be right even if it doesn't feel right. Do you think that's where people get led astray a little bit?
I don't know about led astray. Look, there's one thing you can get with people who've adapted to a position, they're used to a position, and then go for a bike fit where the fitter says, actually, I recommend that we make some fairly radical changes. So it might be 2 or 3 centimeters of saddle height, or 4.5, or we're going to lengthen the stem by a significant amount, 2, 3, 4 centimeters, something like that, or change the height of the bars by a significant amount. Yeah, there's definitely an element of this feels different, therefore it's wrong. And then from a bike fitter point of view, you've kind of almost got to get used to the fact that some people will take it on faith that you're doing a good job, and they'll kind of go with you with the process, and other people will immediately think, well, this doesn't feel like I expected it to feel like, therefore it's wrong. And really then it's the bike fitter's job. If a customer goes away and rides once or twice and then puts their bike back in their old position, firstly, the bike fitter probably hasn't done a very good job, because part of the job is communicating the fact that this process may take time. It's not something that you're going to instantly get on your bike tomorrow and be faster or more comfortable or all of those things. You're not going to get immediate improvement. It's something that your body will adapt to over time. Generally, new riders, you're in luck in that a new rider will tend to adapt to a position quicker because they're not so used to they're not so ingrained in the old position. But yeah, when I went for a fit, my riding position was absolutely appalling before I started bike fitting. It had just been something that I'd kind of set up almost on the fly. I'd just kind of fiddle about with it until it felt all right. I used to get terrible knee pain, terrible back pain. I went for a fit with a guy called Todd Carver, who's one of the chaps that started Retool, the motion capture system that and it wasn't even a full fit. It was just a few minutes in a part of a course I was on, and he wanted to put my saddle up 2 or 3 centimeters and back a few centimeters. It took me the best part of 7 or 8 months to get used to it. It wasn't, and bear in mind I'd ridden 15 or 20 years in a bad position before I made the change, but it wasn't kind of, when I first did it, I was literally looking, when he first suggested to me what the changes to make, I was literally looking at him thinking, this guy's on something. There's absolutely no way I can ride like this. But again, you've got to take it on faith. I'd gone to him as being one of the world authorities on fitting. There has to be a point where you just have to take it on faith that he's going to do it. He'd fitted Lance Armstrong the month before. He's not going to tell me something wrong. So it's one of those things that but there has to be an element of, firstly, good communication from the fitter to say this might not be brilliant straight away. If the saddle's gone up 2 or 3 centimeters, I'm not even going to suggest you do that straight. You even ride in that position straight away. We might work towards that 5 millimeters a month or something like that. But that's part of the job of the fitter, is to communicate that. So if the rider goes away, or the client goes away thinking this feels just utterly wrong, I'm going to put it back to where it was, then clearly that's a waste of their time and the fitter's time and their money. And what should happen there is a review after a number of weeks, or even just a phone call. I've tried riding it and it just feels crazy. What do you think I should do? And then, then we'll come up with a plan that says, well, let's make incremental changes towards a better position, and review it in a month's time or 2 months' time, something like that. Like I said right at the very beginning, it needs to be seen as a process, not as a solution. Clearly, we want to get you into a position that's as good and as efficient and as comfortable as possible, as quickly as possible. But for some people, that can be done in a matter of one fit. We've solved it. We've solved your knee pain. We've solved your back pain or whatever. With other people, it might be, especially when asymmetry is involved and functional asymmetries. And by that, I mean, the customer hasn't necessarily got a leg that's one one leg that's a different length to the other, but it acts as though it is, so their pelvis is twisted, or they sit wonky on the bike, they sit asymmetrically on the bike. That's something that with stretching and physical therapy, massage, joint mobility work, you might be able to improve on over time. So if we put a shim in temporarily, we might gradually take it out over a period of weeks. Or it might be, well, let's try 2 shims now and 3 shims next week and 1 the following week, and see if we can get a solution that works well for you. It isn't always well, the fitter said this, so therefore 100% I must ride in that position all the time. It's a process of working towards a position that works for you. And there isn't a position that's perfect for everybody. I don't believe anybody's got an absolute 100% optimal position. There's a window that we're trying to aim for. You'll be generally comfortable in that position most of the time under most riding conditions. One thing we look at with the motion capture system is how the rider's pedal stroke responds to a change in saddle height. Now, what you'll find is people with very tight hamstrings. You imagine if you've got really tight hamstring, every time the foot comes around the bottom of the pedal stroke, I'm asking the hamstrings to extend and contract, extend and contract. If you've got tight hamstrings, that's harder to do than somebody who's got mobile hamstrings. So effectively, somebody who's more flexible can ride the saddle slightly higher than somebody who can't. But what happens if you've done a hard session yesterday and you wake up today and you're slightly tighter than you were yesterday? So if the argument stands that a more flexible rider can ride with their saddle slightly higher than a stiff rider, then if you're stiffer tomorrow, that means tomorrow, really, in theory, you need your saddle slightly lower than you did the day before. So there definitely isn't an answer that says you must ride in this position all the time. And I would definitely encourage people, once they've been for the fit, to experiment a little bit either side of the position they ended up in to see what works for them. Part of the fit, part of what I've been doing in lockdown is developing processes where we can measure people inside in the fit studio, but then also go out on the road and see how they respond out on the road. I've been fitting in a fit studio for 10 years, never once or twice, but never once actually captured data from a rider when they're out on the road. So what we can do now is fit in the studio and then attach some kit to them, go out and ride on the road and see if they do the same thing out on the road as what they did on the turbo trainer. Because again, there's no saying you do exactly the same when you're out and about climbing up a hill or on a flat or in a headwind or something, or in a crosswind. And most people will sit asymmetrically in a crosswind. They'll lean into the wind slightly. So being able to capture what riders actually do when they're out on the road is kind of a fairly new thing with fitting, and I think it will develop greatly in the next few years.
Well, it's the same with run fit, isn't it? Because that's one of the big issues with gait analysis being done inside on a treadmill in a controlled space like that. It gives you a lot of good information, but people have so many issues. I see a lot in my clinic of people that, well, the shoes felt great when I was on the treadmill, just running for 20 meters up the road and back. But then as soon as I went for 10 miles, it's awful, and I've got this and got that. And it's really interesting to see how things are developing.
Yeah, there's actually some the technology that I use for fitting people out on the road for capturing data from people out on the road. It's a company called Leomo. They're effectively gyroscopes that and accelerometers that we attach, some on the thighs, some on the feet, one on the back, or one on the lower back. It's got 2 modes. It's got a cycle mode and a run mode, so you can actually go out and measure basically how fast the leg swings. And how the angle change of the foot as it comes through the stroke, the run stroke or the run cycle, if you like, as well. So it's effectively the same technology that you can use and do exactly that. The other thing you'll find with this kit is one thing we're looking at now with aerodynamic positions is sustainability. It's all very well with me putting you in a bike position that is theoretically fantastically aero for 10 minutes. But if you're in an Ironman, you can't hold that position for 4 or 5 hours. Then it's useless. So what we can do with this kit is actually send somebody out on a proper training ride, and it will stream data live from their bike to my laptop while they're out riding, and I can actually see if their torso angle is changing, or their pelvic angle is changing, or their pedal stroke is changing while they ride. And if you want to be really intrusive, you can then send them a text message to tell them they're doing it. But effectively, what we're looking at is a way of ascertaining, this position looks like it should work when you're in the fit studio, but does it actually work when you're out on the road? And even from an aerodynamic point of view, we start to use this little device. It's called an aeropod, which you can see that It's got a thing called a pitot tube on the front, and they're starting to become quite popular with pros. So we can actually start doing aerodynamic testing, as in what is your CDA when you're actually physically out on the road rather than in the wind tunnel. Because again, wind tunnels are great, but the most aerodynamic position is one that you possibly can't even ride in. So it's getting that blend between aerodynamics and rideability and sustainability as well.
Because the wind tunnel always looks amazing, doesn't it? But like you say, if you can't sustain it, then it's a bit null and void.
Yeah, you do get a lot of people kind of going into the wind tunnel and saying, well, according to the tunnel, I should have saved 40 watts of drag, which would make me 20 minutes quicker over an Ironman. And then they get out and they can't actually do it when they're out on the road. So it's having the ability to be able to send people out for an hour at a time, or even 3 or 4 hours at a time, and seeing what their body position does while they're actually pedaling, and getting tired as well. That's the other thing the same with cycling as with running. As somebody fatigues, their form changes. So you'll see that with the running, they do this thing. I can't remember what the term. I think it's basically how much the pelvis swings from side to side. And you can watch somebody as they get more and more tired. It wobbles from side to side more, and you can get similar kind of form indicators on the bike as well. The pelvis starts to rock, so we can see the pelvis kind of doing this kind of action and a roll kind of action as well.
Definitely.
And if you're trying to get somebody, if you say you send somebody out at Ironman race pace, and they get 3 or 4 hours in the ride, and you can start to see their pelvis start to move, and you can plot that, you can record it. So obviously then there's an element of training. So the fitter I get, hopefully the longer I should be able to sustain the position. But there's also, from a bike fit point of view, there's the element of let's change the position to see if we can find that blend that they can hold the position. I'd rather have a good position, or a good aerodynamically good position that they can hold for the full distance, than an aerodynamically fantastic position that they can only hold for the first half.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's finding those compromises.
Well, there you go. So this leads on to our final question, and this is perhaps going to be a tough one for you to answer. So let's say we've got no wind tunnel, we've got no gizmos and gadgets to measure it. For a complete beginner or someone looking to move on to the next level, should we say three ways that you could make yourself more aerodynamic?
People love to spend money, and even though wheels they look fantastically sexy and they make a great noise, from a pounds per watt point of view, they're almost the worst way you can gain speed. They'll help with other things, like a light pair of wheels will help you go uphill faster and things like that, and they'll accelerate faster on all those kinds of things. But from an aerodynamic point of view, if you're going to spend money, spend it on the front end of the bike. Anything that hits the wind first is more important. So an aero helmet is important. Tri-bars is the obvious one. If you haven't already got tri-bars on your bike, again, you get that kind of people say, "Oh, I'm not really serious enough to use I'm not really fast enough to use tri-bars." Well, one of the reasons you're not fast enough is because you're not using tri-bars. If the rules of the event tell you that you can use them no matter what your standard. The only point at which you shouldn't use tri-bars, if you're physically not mobile enough, as in your hips effectively, to be able to maintain that position. But a well-fitted tri-bar position should be sustainable, again, as well as reasonably comfortable. So tri-bars is the absolute number one. An aero helmet is a really, really cheap way or a kind of a pounds per watt way of gaining quite a lot. Clothing is the other one that people miss out on. Good clothing, and clothing has advanced so much in the last 10 years. These kind of long slit or sleeved tri-suits with a surface roughening on the arms make a massive difference. And I do mean a recordable difference. If we put the Aeropod on with just a kind of like a floppy vest and go out for a ride, or even worse, a big baggy jersey and go out for a ride and then put a tri-suit on, people can be saving over the course of an Ironman. You can be 5 or 10 minutes quicker just by wearing something different.
That's good.
From the obvious and cheap things, flappy numbers are the one things that drive you absolutely crazy. Doesn't cost you anything. Get a couple of extra safety pins and pin your number down so it doesn't flap about. Just little things like that. Cables at the front end of the bike. If your cables are huge and sticking out all over the place, it costs you almost nothing to shorten them and make them neat and tuck them away and tie cables together to keep them neat and out of the wind. Look for the obvious cheap stuff before you start spending £2,000 on a pair of wheels. But yeah, effectively, as far as purchase upgrades, body position, which includes tri-bars, so a good bike fit incorporating a pair of tri-bars. Clothing, so a really good proper aerodynamic tri-suit. The ones from kind of BioRacer and No Pins and these kinds of companies are absolutely brilliant. And then your helmet. In conjunction with the helmet, like I said, I kind of touched on a little earlier, head position, learning to tuck your head position. So the amount of people I see on kind of tri-bars or fantastically expensive tri-bikes where their head is kind of sat up in the air like this, the difference between this and this is 20 watts at 25 miles an hour. And most people can't train hard enough in a year to be able to gain 20 watts of race pace. Yeah, I mean, and it's literally just you put your head in a slightly different position, and it can make a huge difference. So if you see a skier or the best, just copy the best triathletes. If you see the best Ironman triathletes on the TV, they keep fantastically consistent position, low head positions all of the time, because they know that the difference in head position is making more of a difference than their rear wheel is. So if you could spend £2,000 on a disc wheel, it will make less of a difference than you can do yourself by riding with a good head position. And marry that with a good aerodynamic helmet, and you can make yourself significantly quicker. The only time I would say would warn against an aero helmet, and I mean a fully enclosed aero helmet, is heat. You do get hot in there, so if you're talented enough to be going and doing one of the big events in like Hawaii or something like that where it can get exceptionally hot, then you got to kind of marry heat loss against aerodynamics. And again, I'd rather you finish the bike and manage to run than looked fabulous and were fantastically aerodynamic for the first hour and a half.
Well, a lot of them kind of go halfway, don't they? That? So they're slightly more. Well, there's still more aero, but
kind of road aero helmet is quite a good compromise. But the difference between a close-fitting aero helmet that fills the gaps nicely and encourages good airflow over your back, and a standard kind of vented helmet, you can be talking 8 or 9 watts. Bearing in mind that most people aren't producing more than about 250 in a triathlon. So we were talking pretty big percentage gains. You've got like a 5% difference just by changing your helmet. What I would say to everybody is, just because you aren't elite, don't take advantage of the gains that are available. You've got to race within your budget, you've got to have your kit within your budget. But again, you could have a bike fit, a pair of tri-bars, and an aero helmet for half the price of a pair of wheels, and make much bigger gains. So kind of spend your money wisely.
To be fair though, the wheels do look cool.
A disc wheel makes a fantastic noise. It makes me feel brilliant, but it's right at the back. The airflow is so dirty by the time it gets to that point. It's so turbulent by the time it gets to that point that it's really not making. It makes I'm not saying it doesn't make a difference. It makes a difference, but there are better ways and cheaper ways of making as big a gain.
No, that's awesome.
Interesting.
There we go. Well, loads of stuff that I'm sure we'll pick up on again in the future. That's been awesome.
Yeah, definitely.
Anything else from you, Lauren?
I feel like my mind's been slightly blown with all the knowledge.
Yeah, it's incredible.
And just little things that you don't always think
absolutely.
Of. So,
a lot of it is kind of keeping in mind that it is relatively simple. I think a lot of people with a bike fit, especially coming to somewhere like me where I've got a lot of kit, I'm very much, you do get these kind of bike fitters who are very sort of they're very experienced, and they almost seem to be you can kind of include me in this category as well. They're so experienced that they almost seem to be able to do it without the kit. And a lot of people, very good fitters, don't use any equipment at all. They literally just look at the rider. And that, I'm not saying for a minute that those fitters aren't good. The best fitters are the people that can do it by eye anyway, and the kit is just there to help them out. But when you come into an environment like this where you might have kind of LEDs all over you or gyroscopes stuck all over you, and I've got some sensors that can measure how the EMG sensors, they can measure how hard your muscles are firing, so the electrical activity in your muscles. You're kind of wired up to all this stuff, and it can be quite intimidating, whereas really the fitter is there just to pick. What we're not there is to use tools for the sake of using them and somebody go in and say, wow, there was so much technology there, it must have been right. The tools are there to delve into particular areas of rider movement. And it can be quite intimidating for somebody coming in, especially a new athlete or a new rider coming in, thinking, oh, this guy must have seen lots of pros or lots of this and that and the other. As far as I'm concerned, if you're walking in the door for a bike fit, then you're going to get my full attention for the time that you're there, and you're as deserving as anybody else who's, whether they've won a stage in the Tour de France or whether it's the first time you've ridden a bike with drop handlebars before. So if you're serious enough to go for a bike fit, and I recommend that anybody who's doing a triathlon of anything above sprint distance should be, then it's fine to go in and be fussy and talk about things that hurt and expect things to improve, but don't be intimidated by tech, because it really is there to help rather than just to kind of impress people. Certainly a few years back when Retool first came out, Retool is the motion capture system that I use, and there are a lot of other motion capture systems available now, although it was basically the first commercial one. There was a lot of kind of talk about it almost being kind of smoke and mirrors. It kind of, well, it looks flash, so it's there to impress the customer. The tech is impressive, but they're tools, and they should be seen as tools to help the fitter. Effectively, if you can't ask the fitter a question and then give you an answer that is believable, go and find another fitter.
Yeah, get hold of Andy.
Yeah.
That's perfect.
But it's great if people can come see me. It's brilliant. I'm everybody's welcome kind of thing, but there are lots of very good fitters. The one thing I would say is fitters is search via recommendation rather than just because your local shop says you should go there. There's a lot of people fitting nowadays, and there are some very, very good fitters in the UK. Where there's an organisation called the IBFI, the International Bike Fitting Institute. They're a good place to start to try and find somebody local to you. I'm in the southwest of England, so anybody's welcome. I have people come from a long way to come and see me, but yeah, you can bet your beans that there's somebody pretty good in your area. But yeah, don't just accept the kind of like my local shop did it. But having said that, you'll quite often find that the old guy who's been running your local shop for 40 years has got a pretty good eye for it.
Yeah,
definitely. Awesome. Well, Andy, we're going to call that a wrap. But no, that's been awesome.
Yeah,
thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, we'll put some links to Andy, and we'll obviously stick up some more videos with Andy at some point. But yeah, for now, thank you very much, Andy.
Yeah,
We're
you.
Go and
cheers.
Tinker around.
Good night.
Cheers, Andy.
Cheerio. Bye bye.